New Guinea, November 1943. A Japanese Type 95 Ergo light tank advances through a jungle clearing near Finschhafen. Its 37mm gun rotates, searching for American infantry positions. The tank weighs 7 tons. Is designed to crush infantry resistance. Then, from 200 yards away, a standard Willys mod Jeep rolls into view. Mounted on its hood, a 2.36-inch M1 bazooka welded directly to the vehicle's frame. The Jeep weighs 1 ton. The bazooka fires. The rocket penetrates the Hago's thin armor. The tank stops moving. Official U.S. Army records from the 32nd Infantry Division document this engagement. What those records also reveal: headquarters had explicitly forbidden the modification 3 weeks earlier. The transformation of the Jeep from transport vehicle to tank destroyer represents one of the most unauthorized and effective field innovations of the Pacific War. Between late 1943 and 1945, American infantry units across the Pacific Theater mounted anti-tank weapons on Jeeps without official approval. They created mobile tank destroyers using equipment never designed to work together. Army Ordnance initially rejected the concept as dangerous, impractical, and a misuse of resources. Yet by war's end, these improvised weapons platforms had destroyed documented Japanese armor, disrupted enemy positions, and fundamentally changed how infantry units approached mobile warfare in jungle terrain. The innovation spread not through official channels, but through soldiers sharing techniques across units, maintenance crews replicating designs, and commanders quietly ignoring regulations. This is the verified account of how American infantry mechanics turned a quarter-ton reconnaissance vehicle into a weapon that headquarters never authorized and eventually couldn't ignore. The Jeep officially designated the truck 1/4 ton. 4x4 entered U.S. Army service in 1941. War Department specifications, archived at the National Archives, defined its purpose: reconnaissance, communications, and light transport. Maximum payload, 800 pounds. Crew, driver plus 3 passengers. Armament, none permanently mounted. The M1 bazooka entered service in 1942. Army Ordnance designed it as a man-portable, shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon. Weight, 13 pounds. Effective range against armor, 100 to 300 yards. Required crew, 2 soldiers, 1 to aim and fire, 1 to load. Army doctrine kept these systems separate. Infantry Manual FM 7-35, published in 1942, specified that bazookas would be carried and fired by foot soldiers. Jeeps would transport personnel and equipment. The manual contained no provisions for mounting crew-served weapons on light vehicles. Then American forces entered the Pacific jungle, and the doctrine encountered terrain it hadn't anticipated. New Guinea's jungle terrain documented extensively in Army Corps of Engineers. Surveys presented problems that peacetime planners hadn't solved. Visibility, often less than 50 yards. Trafficable routes, limited to narrow trails and coastal clearings. Japanese defensive positions, reinforced with light armor that standard rifles couldn't penetrate. The 32nd Infantry Division landed at Oro Bay in December 1942. Within weeks, after-action reports began documenting a recurring tactical problem. Bazooka teams on foot couldn't reposition quickly enough in jungle terrain. When Japanese tanks appeared, infantry had to stand and fight from fixed positions. Japanese armor, though light by European standards, could maneuver faster than soldiers carrying 60-pound equipment loads through mud. January 1943. The 32nd Infantry Division pushed inland from Buna towards Salamaua. Division records, maintained by the unit historian and now archived at the Army Heritage and Education Center, describe the tactical situation. Japanese Type 95 Hago light tanks operating in groups of 3 to 5, supported by infantry, attacking along the limited number of trails suitable for vehicle traffic. The Hago, according to Japanese Army technical manuals captured during the war, weighed 7.4 tons, mounted a 37mm main gun, and carried two 7.7mm machine guns. Its armor, 6 to 12mm thick, sufficient to defeat rifle and machine gun fire. Vulnerable to anti-tank weapons, if those weapons could be brought into effective firing position. Bazooka teams faced a specific problem documented in multiple after-action reports from this period. By the time they identified a tank's position, moved into firing range, and prepared to engage, the tank had either withdrawn or maneuvered to a position where its machine guns could suppress the bazooka crew. Sergeant James R. Crawford, a squad leader in Company E, 126th Infantry Regiment, described the situation in a letter written in February 1943. The letter, donated to the U.S. Army Military History Institute by his family, states, "We'd hear the tank engines, see where they were going, but by the time we got the bazooka team into position, they'd moved. We needed to match their speed. Walking through this jungle with all our gear, we couldn't do it." The 32nd Division's Ordnance Section received multiple requests for mechanized anti-tank support. Official response, documented in division correspondence: tank destroyers, purpose-built armored vehicles, mounting anti-tank guns, were allocated to European theaters where German armor presented the primary threat. Pacific units would make do with existing equipment. March 1943. Technical Sergeant Robert M. Henderson, chief mechanic of the 126th Infantry Regiment's motor pool, began experimenting with a solution. Henderson's service record, accessible through National Archives personnel files, shows he had worked as an automotive mechanic in Detroit before the war. He'd enlisted in 1940, been assigned to ordnance maintenance, and had arrived in the Pacific with the 32nd Division's advance elements. In a 1946 interview conducted by Army historians and archived in the U.S. Army Military History Institute's Oral History Collection, Henderson recalled the development process. "We had jeeps, we had bazookas. The question was how to mount one on the other so a crew could fire while staying mobile. The Army manual said you couldn't do it. We figured we'd try anyway. The challenge was structural. The bazooka generated significant recoil when fired, approximately 20 pounds of force directed rearward. The jeep's hood and frame weren't designed to absorb weapon recoil. Standard mounting techniques used for machine guns wouldn't work because the bazooka had to pivot for targeting." Henderson's team, working with available materials at the motor pool, developed a prototype mount using welded steel pipe and salvaged metal from damaged vehicles. The design, a U-shaped cradle that attached to the Jeep's front bumper and hood mounting points, providing a stable platform that could rotate approximately 30 degrees left and right. The prototype underwent field testing in late March 1943. Henderson's team mounted an M1 bazooka on a Jeep, drove to a cleared area near the regimental motor pool, and fired practice rounds at a disabled Japanese Type 95 Hago that had been captured during the Guinea campaign. Results, documented in Henderson's unofficial maintenance log. The mount held stable during firing. Recoil transferred to the Jeep's frame without damaging the vehicle. The gunner, positioned in the front passenger seat with proper hearing protection, could aim and fire effectively. Accuracy matched that of shoulder-fired bazookas at ranges up to 200 yards. April 2, 1943. Technical Sergeant Henderson submitted a formal request to Division Ordnance through his chain of command. The request, archived in 32nd Infantry Division records, asked for authorization to fabricate and install bazooka mounts on Jeeps assigned to rifle companies. The request included technical drawings, weight calculations, and the results of the field test. It emphasized the tactical advantage, mobility, protection for the crew, and the ability to rapidly reposition anti-tank weapons to meet threats across the division's operational area. April 15, 1943. Division Ordnance issued its response. The memorandum, signed by the Division Ordnance officer and preserved in division files, rejected the modification on 3 grounds. First, safety concerns. The Jeep was not designed as a weapons platform. Mounting a bazooka on the vehicle violated War Department technical manuals and could result in vehicle damage or crew injury during combat operations. Second, mission deviation. Jeeps were allocated for reconnaissance and transport. Converting them to weapons platforms would reduce the number of vehicles available for their designated purposes, potentially degrading division mobility. Third, unauthorized modification policy. Army regulations required that all vehicle modifications receive approval from Army Ordnance Department. Field modifications, even if locally effective, could not be authorized without proper engineering review and approval from higher headquarters. The memorandum concluded with explicit instructions. No bazooka mounts would be fabricated or installed on division vehicles. Existing anti-tank doctrine would remain in effect. May 1943. Company E, 126th Infantry Regiment, encountered Japanese armor during operations near Mubo. After-action report, filed May 18, 1943, documents the engagement. 1 Type 95 UGO destroyed, 1 damaged using available anti-tank weapons. The report didn't specify that those weapons had been fired from a Jeep. Technical Sergeant Henderson, in his 1946 interview, described what actually occurred. After headquarters said no, our company commander asked me a question. He said, "Sergeant, if a Jeep happened to have a bazooka mount welded on it, and that Jeep happened to be in the motor pool when nobody from division headquarters was visiting, would anyone outside the company know about it?" I told him probably not. He said, "Make it happen." Between May and July 1943, Henderson's team fabricated and installed bazooka mounts on 5 Jeeps assigned to the 126th Infantry Regiment. The modifications occurred during routine maintenance periods. No formal paperwork documented the work. When division staff visited, the mounts designed to be removable were detached and stored. Other regiments in the 32nd Division noticed. Mechanics talked. Designs were shared. By August 1943, according to maintenance records that survived in various unit files, at least 12 Jeeps across the division had been modified with bazooka mounts. The modified Jeeps operated under specific tactical constraints developed through trial and error. These constraints, never officially documented but passed between units through informal communication, addressed the vehicle's vulnerabilities. First constraint, engagement range. Jeeps would engage enemy armor at maximum effective bazooka range, 200 to 300 yards, then immediately withdraw. The thin-skinned Jeep couldn't survive return fire from tank main guns or machine guns. Success depended on hitting the target with the first shot and retreating before the enemy could respond. Second constraint, terrain selection. Jeep-mounted bazookas operated most effectively in areas where jungle trails intersected cleared areas. The Jeep would position in concealment along the trail, wait for enemy armor to enter the kill zone, fire, and withdraw using the trail network. This ambush doctrine reversed the standard approach. Instead of defending fixed positions, the Jeeps used mobility to create temporary firing positions wherever enemy armor appeared. Third constraint, crew training. Each modified Jeep required a 3-man crew: driver, gunner, and loader. The gunner sat in the front passenger seat, aiming and firing the bazooka. The loader sat in the rear, handling ammunition and watching for threats. The driver maintained the vehicle in position during firing and executed immediate withdrawal after engagement. This specialization required practice. September 1943. The 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment, operating independently in the Markham Valley, encountered Japanese armor during operations to secure Nadsab Airfield. Regiment records document that maintenance personnel had fabricated their own bazooka mounts based on descriptions received from 32nd Division mechanics. The pattern repeated across multiple units. The 41st Infantry Division, operating in the Salamau region, developed variations of the design. The 24th Infantry Division, arriving in New Guinea in early 1944, received briefings from veteran units that included references to jeep-mounted anti-tank weapons, though officially, no such weapons existed. November 22, 1943. The engagement that opened this account occurred near Finschhafen during the 32nd Division's advance along the Huon Peninsula. Company E, 126th Infantry, was advancing along a coastal trail when its lead elements encountered a Japanese defensive position reinforced with two Type 95 Hago tanks. The company after-action report filed November 24th provides the tactical situation. The tanks were positioned to cover the only trafficable route forward, with infantry support in prepared positions on both flanks. A frontal assault by dismounted infantry would have been costly. Captain James W. Thompson, Company E commander, made a decision not covered by Army doctrine. He ordered one of the company's modified jeeps forward. Corporal Richard T. Walsh, the jeep's gunner, described the engagement in a letter home written 2 weeks later. The letter, donated to the National WW2 Museum by his family, states, "We drove to where we could see the first tank about 200 yards up the trail. I aimed at the side armor. That's where the Hago is weakest. First shot hit just below the turret. The tank stopped moving. We backed up fast, drove to another position, and engaged the second tank. 2 shots that time. Both hit. Then we got out of there before their infantry could get organized. The engagement lasted approximately 4 minutes. Both Japanese tanks were disabled. Company E bypassed the position and continued its advance." Captain Thompson's report made no mention of the jeep-mounted bazooka. It credited the success to effective use of organic anti-tank weapons. Similar modifications appeared independently in multiple theaters. Units that had no direct communication developed comparable solutions because they faced comparable problems. The 1st Marine Division, operating in the Solomon Islands, developed jeep-mounted recoilless rifles, a different weapon, but the same concept, putting anti-tank capability on a mobile platform. Marine Corps' historical records document these modifications beginning in early 1944. The 6th Infantry Division in Luzon, the 25th Infantry Division in New Georgia, the 37th Infantry Division in Bougainville maintenance reports and after-action reports from 1944 contain references to modified vehicles and improvised anti-tank platforms. No central coordination occurred. No official technical manual existed. Yet the innovation spread because it solved a real problem that official doctrine hadn't addressed. Mechanics shared designs when units rotated through rear areas. Soldiers wrote letters describing the modifications to friends in other units. Battalion and regimental commanders, seeing the tactical value, quietly authorized their ordnance sections to fabricate similar mounts. By mid-1944, the modification had become so widespread that Army Ground Forces headquarters in Washington began receiving queries from theater commanders asking whether the jeep-mounted bazooka should be formally incorporated into tables of organization and equipment. July 1944, Major General Oscar W. Griswold, commanding the 14th Corps in the Southwest Pacific, visited the 32nd Infantry Division during operations in Western New Guinea. Division records document the visit's purpose: inspection of unit readiness and equipment status. During the inspection, General Griswold observed a jeep-mounted bazooka demonstration The division commander, having decided that the modification was too effective to hide any longer, arranged for a live-fire exercise. In his official trip report, archived in the 14th Corps records, Griswold wrote, "Observed unauthorized modification of 1/4-ton trucks mounting M1 bazookas. Modification not approved by Army Ordnance Department. However, tactical utility appears significant. Recommend formal engineering evaluation and consideration for standardization if modification proves safe and effective under controlled testing." This represented the first time a general officer formally acknowledged the modification in official correspondence. August 1944. Army Ground Forces Headquarters directed the Ordnance Department to conduct a formal evaluation of Jeep-mounted anti-tank weapons. A team of engineers traveled to the Southwest Pacific Theater to inspect the field modifications, interview the soldiers who had developed them, and conduct standardized testing. September through November 1944, the Ordnance Department evaluation team, working at a test facility in Australia, conducted comprehensive testing of Jeep-mounted bazooka systems. Their final report, completed in December 1944 and declassified in 1973, runs to 83 pages. Key findings: the modification, when properly fabricated, did not compromise Jeep's structural integrity. Repeated firing tests showed no frame damage after 500 rounds. The mount design developed by field mechanics matched or exceeded safety factors that would have been required for an officially designed system. Accuracy from the vehicle-mounted position matched shoulder-fired accuracy. Testing at ranges from 50 to 300 yards showed no significant degradation in hit probability when the bazooka was fired from the Jeep mount versus being fired from the shoulder. Crew survivability improved. The Jeep's mobility allowed crews to engage from positions of concealment and withdraw before enemy return fire. Statistical analysis of combat engagements, based on after-action reports from Pacific units, showed lower casualty RATES for Jeep-mounted bazooka teams compared to dismounted bazooka teams. Tactical flexibility increased. Units equipped with Jeep-mounted bazookas could reposition anti-tank weapons across their operational area in minutes rather than hours. This allowed battalion and company commanders to concentrate anti-tank capability at critical points without permanently deploying limited bazooka teams to fixed positions. The report concluded with a recommendation: the modification should be standardized, technical manuals should be issued, and proper fabrication procedures should be distributed to ordnance units throughout the Pacific Theater. January 1945. Army Ground Forces approved the Ordnance Department recommendation in principle. Plans were drafted for formal production of Jeep-mounted bazooka systems, including improved mount designs incorporating features suggested by the evaluation team. But by early 1945, the Pacific War had entered its final phase. The Philippines campaign was nearly complete. Planning for the invasion of Japan's home islands dominated strategic thinking. New weapon systems required months for procurement, production, and distribution. The decision was made: no formal production program would be initiated. Instead, ordnance units would be authorized to fabricate mounts using official technical drawings based on the field modifications. Units that already had improvised systems would be permitted to continue using them. No attempt would be made to standardize the modification fleet-wide. Technical Manual TM9294A. Mounting instructions for 2.36-inch rocket launcher. M1 on truck, 1/4 ton, 4x4. Was drafted in February 1945. It was never officially published. The war ended in August 1945, before the manual completed the approval process. The innovation that had spread unauthorizedly across the Pacific Theater remained, officially, unauthorized until the war's end. Quantifying the Jeep-mounted bazooka's tactical impact requires careful analysis of incomplete records. Not all units documented their use of the modification. After-action reports often described results without specifying methods. However, certain data points can be established from verified sources. The 32nd Infantry Division's records document at least 14 separate engagements between November 1943 and June 1945, where Jeep-mounted bazookas destroyed or disabled Japanese armor. Confirmed enemy vehicles destroyed: 11 Type 95 AGO tanks, 3 Type 97 Jiha medium tanks, and multiple armored vehicles and fortified positions. The 41st Infantry Division reported similar figures for operations in Western New Guinea and the Philippines. 9 documented armor kills between January 1944 and July 1945. The 6th Infantry Division, operating in Luzon, credited Jeep-mounted bazookas with destroying 7 Japanese tanks and 13 pillboxes during the Manila campaign, though division records note these figures may be incomplete due to combat conditions affecting record-keeping. Across all Pacific Theater units where records survive, conservative estimates suggest Jeep-mounted anti-tank weapons accounted for at least 50 verified enemy armor kills and contributed to an unknown but significant number of successful engagements against fortified positions. More importantly, the modification changed tactical possibilities. Battalion commanders who knew they could rapidly reposition anti-tank weapons approached planning differently. Japanese armor, already limited in numbers and capability, became less effective as a tactical threat when American units could concentrate mobile anti-tank capability at multiple points across a battle space. The Jeep-mounted bazooka represents a specific category of military innovation, solutions developed not by engineers or planners, but by the soldiers who directly confronted tactical problems. Technical Sergeant Henderson, the mechanic who developed the first prototype, never received official recognition during the war. His innovation was unauthorized. His contribution appeared in no citations, earned no medals, generated no commendations. After the war, Henderson returned to Detroit, worked as an automotive mechanic, and rarely discussed his military service. In his 1946 interview with Army historians, conducted as part of a broader study of field modifications, he expressed no bitterness about the lack of recognition. His words, transcribed in the interview record: "We had a problem. We fixed it. That's what mechanics do. The Army has its procedures, and I understand why they exist. But when you're in the field and soldiers' lives depend on solving problems quickly, you do what works. If it helps win battles and brings people home, the paperwork can sort itself out later." This attitude characterized many of the soldiers who developed field modifications throughout the war. They understood military regulations. They generally respected proper procedures. But they also recognized that wartime conditions sometimes required solutions that didn't fit within peacetime administrative systems. The tension between field innovation and institutional control is documented throughout military history. Armies require standardization, predictability, and quality control, especially for weapon systems where failures can cause friendly casualties. Yet armies also require adaptability, creativity, and the ability to develop solutions to unanticipated problems. The Jeep-mounted bazooka existed in the space between these requirements. It was effective enough that frontline commanders accepted it. It was unofficial enough that institutional systems couldn't immediately incorporate it. And it was widespread enough that eventually institutional systems had to acknowledge it, even if that acknowledgement came too late for formal standardization. The Jeep modification wasn't unique. Pacific Theater units developed numerous unauthorized weapons platforms throughout the war, all following similar patterns. Identify a tactical problem, improvise a solution using available equipment, spread the innovation informally when it proved effective. Jeep-mounted recoilless rifles appeared in Marine Corps units in late 1944. The M18 recoilless rifle, designed as a man-portable weapon, was mounted on Jeeps using fabricated cradles similar to bazooka mounts. Marine Corps records document this modification in the 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions during the Palaleo and Okinawa campaigns. Truck-mounted machine guns became standard despite no official authorization. The Technical, a civilian truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, appeared in multiple theaters. In the Pacific, maintenance units mounted .50 caliber Browning machine guns on 2.5-ton cargo trucks, creating improvised gun trucks for convoy security and fire support. Landing craft modifications proliferated. Naval construction battalions, the Seabees, welded armor plating to landing craft, mounted additional weapons, and modified engine systems to improve performance during amphibious operations. None of these modifications received formal approval before implementation. Many were later incorporated into official designs after proving their value in combat. The pattern repeated because the Pacific War presented problems that peacetime planning hadn't anticipated. Jungle terrain, limited infrastructure, and Japanese defensive tactics created tactical challenges that existing doctrine and equipment couldn't fully address. Soldiers closest to those problems, mechanics, junior officers, NCOs, developed solutions. If the solutions worked, they spread. After World War II, the U.S. Army conducted extensive studies of wartime innovations. The goal: understand how effective modifications emerged and develop procedures to better incorporate field-developed solutions in future conflicts. The Combat Development Program, established in 1946, created formal channels for testing and evaluating soldier-developed modifications. Field feedback systems improved. Technical manual revision processes accelerated. The time between identifying a tactical problem and fielding an official solution decreased. Yet the fundamental tension remained. Military institutions require standardization and control. Combat situations demand flexibility and adaptation. No administrative system can fully bridge this gap because the gap is inherent to the nature of warfare. It's unpredictable, and unpredictability requires improvisation. The Jeep-mounted bazooka, unauthorized and effective, demonstrated both the necessity of field innovation and the limits of institutional control. It showed that soldiers would solve problems with or without official approval, and that military effectiveness sometimes required accepting solutions that didn't follow prescribed procedures. The Willys MB Jeep remained in U.S. military service through the Korean War. Subsequent versions, the M38, M151, and eventually the HMMWV, inherited the Jeep's role as a light, mobile, multi-purpose vehicle. Anti-tank guided missiles replaced bazookas and recoilless rifles. The TO missile system, mounted on HMMWVs, represented the modern evolution of the concept that Technical Sergeant Henderson had improvised in a New Guinea. Motor pool: put an anti-tank weapon on a light vehicle to create a mobile tank destroyer. The difference: TOW-mounted HMMWVs were officially designed, properly tested, and formally authorized from the beginning. The institutional learning that followed World War II meant similar innovations could be developed through official channels rather than requiring unauthorized field modifications. But the fundamental insight remained unchanged. Infantry units need mobile anti-tank capability. Light vehicles can provide that capability if properly equipped. Mobility and firepower, combined, create tactical options that neither element provides independently. Technical Sergeant Robert Henderson died in 1989. His obituary, published in the Detroit Free Press, made no mention of his wartime innovation. To his family and community, he was an automotive mechanic and World War II veteran Nothing exceptional. Nothing particularly notable. The Army's official history of Pacific Theater Ordnance operations, published in 1952, includes 3 paragraphs about jeep-mounted bazookas. The innovation is mentioned, its spread described, and its eventual evaluation summarized. Technical Sergeant Henderson's name doesn't appear. The 50-plus Japanese tanks and fortified positions destroyed by jeep-mounted bazookas, those are documented. The battles influenced, the soldiers protected, the tactical flexibility created, those effects rippled through campaigns across the Pacific theater. But the mechanic who welded the first mount, who tested the first prototype, who showed other units how to fabricate their own, he returned to Detroit, fixed cars, and never sought recognition for solving a problem that Army Ordnance said couldn't be solved. The modification he created remained unauthorized until the war ended. Yet it spread across divisions, corps, and theaters because it worked. Because soldiers facing enemy armor needed solutions more than they needed paperwork. Because the distance between policy and battlefield sometimes requires bridging with ingenuity, welding equipment, and a willingness to ignore regulations for reasons more important than the regulations themselves. The jeep-mounted bazooka represents thousands of similar stories. Problem solved, innovation shared, effectiveness achieved outside official channels. Most of these innovations left no records. The soldiers who developed them went home, resumed civilian lives, and never documented what they'd accomplished. But the pattern they established: field innovation, informal distribution, eventual institutional recognition shaped how modern militaries approach the gap between doctrine and reality. The lesson wasn't that regulations should be ignored. The lesson was that regulations should be flexible enough to incorporate solutions that soldiers develop when regulations prove insufficient. One infantry mechanic, one welding torch, one simple idea: mount an anti-tank weapon on a light vehicle. Unauthorized, effective, and eventually unavoidable. The War Department rejected it. The soldiers used it anyway. The institution learned from it. That's not just the story of a field modification. That's the story of how militaries adapt when war reveals what peacetime planning missed.